Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll just give things a minute to allow folks to enter the virtual room. Thanks so much. Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. We appreciate you participating in today's webinar. I am Tara King, a Senior Project Director at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS for short. AAAS is the world's largest general science association and the publisher of the Science family of journals. I serve as the center coordinator for the S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center, which we abbreviate as the S-STEM REC. AAAS is happy to facilitate this opportunity for you to ask NSF S-STEM program directors questions about the S-STEM solicitation as you prepare your proposal submission, which is due on March 3rd. Joining us today are Tom Kim and Mike Ferrara, who are co-leads of the NSF S-STEM program. The AAAS S-STEM REC is thankful for our ongoing partnership with Tom and Mike to serve the S-STEM community. Next slide, please. Before I jump in, let's go over a few housekeeping items. Please feel free to ask questions at any time throughout today's webinar. It's never too early to do so. Please use the Q&A feature to type in your questions. What we will be doing is upvoting questions. So if you see a question that aligns with something you're thinking about or a question that you'd like to hear the answer to, please give a thumbs up to that question. And we'll prioritize getting answers to those inquiries that have the most upvotes. One other note about the Q&A feature. Our NSF colleagues may answer some of the more straightforward questions right in writing. So please keep an eye on not only the open questions tab, but the answered questions tab as well. The slides being presented today can be found on the AAAS S-STEM REC website. If you'd like to follow along with the slides on your computer, you can download them now, and I see my colleague Rachel has put that link in the chat. Also, a recording of today's webinar will be posted on our website when it becomes available. We're happy to have two American Sign Language interpreters joining us today. In addition, we're pleased to have a live transcriptioner providing closed captioning. Our thanks to these individuals for helping us make the information presented in today's webinar much more widely accessible. We hope that everything runs smoothly, but please, if you have any technical difficulties or questions, contact my colleague Rachel Stivers in the chat or send her an email. And finally, we would really appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. We'd like to know how useful it was for you, any suggestions you have to improve it. A short survey will appear when you leave the webinar, and if you're unable to take it upon exiting today, a link to the survey will be emailed to you tomorrow. We thank you in advance for sharing your thoughts with us to help us improve our offerings for you. Next slide, please. So for anybody that's just joining us, hello and welcome. My name is Tara King, and I am the Center Coordinator of the AAAS S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center. I'm thrilled to facilitate this proposal preparation webinar as part of the S-STEM REC's work, which is made possible by funding from the National Science Foundation. Let me provide a quick overview of today's agenda. We'll provide a brief overview of the AAAS S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center, and direct you to some of our resources that may be helpful as you prepare your S-STEM proposal submission. Then I'll hand things over to Tom Kim, lead NSF S-STEM program officer, to highlight important information in the current S-STEM solicitation. And then after that, we'll spend the bulk of our time together discussing your questions with Tom Kim and Mike Ferrara, who are the NSF S-STEM co-lead program directors. Again, remember to use the Q&A function to ask your questions. You could type them at any time, and you can also upvote other folks' questions. We'll prioritize addressing those that are upvoted the most, and we'll do our best to get through all the questions you asked today. Again, Tom and Mike will be writing responses to some of the more direct questions in the Q&A tab as well. So keep an eye on both the answered and open question tabs. Okay, next slide. Let's get started by giving you a very brief introduction to the AAAS S-STEM REC. So the management of the S-STEM Resource Evaluation, or REC for short, was awarded to AAAS in October 2022 through a competitive NSF proposal process. The REC focuses on promoting the exchange of ideas, resources, opportunities, and knowledge about effective strategies and practices to increase the number of talented, low-income students who obtain degrees and careers in STEM. The activities of the REC work across multiple levels. For instance, we support the effectiveness of the S-STEM portfolio through publishing S-STEM outcomes and impacts reports. We build the capacity of current and prospective S-STEM grantees through webinars like this one. And we support S-STEM scholars' STEM persistence and professional development through convening an annual in-person scholars meeting. We welcome you to visit our website to learn more. Next slide. While the REC is managed by AAAS in coordination with the National Science Foundation, we could not reach all of our goals without the significant contributions of our full team, which includes our partner organizations, which are listed on this slide. Next slide. One of our partners, MN Associates, Inc., works with us to provide evaluation and research capacity building opportunities for the S-STEM community. We'd like to make you aware of a set of complimentary webinars that M&A will be hosting in February on the topics of developing research and evaluation plans and developing and using a logic model or theory of change. We encourage you to check out these opportunities. Links with more information will be posted in the chat. Also, our partners at MN Associates, Inc. have created a useful guidebook on preparing research and evaluation plans for NSF S-STEM grant proposals, as well as repositories of tools and measures related to evidence-based practices. Please download and explore these resources. In addition to interacting with M&A during these webinars next month, you can seek their help by completing a request form with your specific inquiry. We've posted a link to that form in the chat as well. And finally, just a note, please note that the S-STEM REC is promoting consultation with M&A as their REC partner. However, this does not constitute an endorsement of M&A as evaluators by the National Science Foundation. Next slide. Today's webinar is the first in a series. You're welcome to join any of the REC's upcoming offerings. Next week on January 26th, we will run another webinar with the same Q&A format as today. Our two webinars in February will have a slightly different format. On February 3rd, the discussion will include insights from a panel of current S-STEM PIs at community colleges. And on February 9th, we'll have a panel of current S-STEM PIs who lead S-STEM programs that support master's or doctoral level scholars. See the link posted in the chat to register and for more information. Next slide. And finally, as you prepare your S-STEM grant proposal, the following NSF resources provide essential guidance. These include the full text of the current solicitation, a recording of an overview webinar that explains the solicitation requirements in detail, and an FAQ document that contains the most commonly asked questions about the solicitation. All of these links will also be posted in the chat. So now it's my pleasure to pass things over to NSF S-STEM Program Lead, Tom Kim, to highlight important details of the current S-STEM solicitation. Tom?
Thanks, Tara, and welcome everyone. As Tara mentioned, I am the program lead for the S-STEM program, and I have the distinct pleasure of debriefing you a bit on the program requirements and highlights for the upcoming submission on March 3rd. Next slide, please. All right. It is also my pleasure to say that the current solicitation is 25-514, which means there was not a new solicitation released for the upcoming deadline. So all of the things that held true in the previous submission are still true for this year's deadline. And so once again, the deadline is March 3rd. The maximum amount for track one was elevated to $2 million in the previous competition, and 50% of the total budget request was allocated to scholarship for track one. That was a revision for the 2025 competition, and it holds true now. Evaluation logic models must be included as a supplementary document. They are no longer to be placed in the project description, as was the case last year. And also your demographic data summarizing your pool of potential candidates for scholarships should be also included as a supplementary document. All right, so all of these are carryovers from last year. Once again, the maximum amount per scholar is $15,000 per year at the undergraduate level and $20,000 per year at the graduate level. And there is a maximum window of scholarship of 5 years per degree. And once again, you're all familiar by now. The FAFSA form now calculates unmet need via the student aid index rather than the effective family contribution number. And once again, financial aid offices must be active participants in your proposal construction. They must submit a letter that determines the definition of low income and basically accedes to their doing the due diligence with respect to scholar eligibility and scholarship amounts. And so really all of this is wrapped around the notion that you should be able to demonstrate that you have an adequate pool of scholar candidates such that if you were to be awarded, the scholarships would actually reach the students in question. The central goal of S-STEM is to support academically talented domestic low-income students with financial need pursuing a degree in an S-STEM eligible discipline. And the student-centeredness of that statement holds true across all of the program tracks. You should also adapt and implement evidence-based curricular and co-curricular activities, basically not just the scholarship money, but you should have some wraparound services that are going to align with the needs of the scholars and facilitate their success. And the graduation of these low-income scholars is the benchmark of success in the program. This is a workforce development program, but the proxy measure that we will use is graduation with a degree in STEM. And you should also be vetting strategies that you're employing to support these scholars in their pathway in STEM. Finally, you should be disseminating the findings of any evidence that you collect of successes and maybe not successes along your trajectory. Next slide. Okay. Once again, the outcome for the scholars is the attainment of an associate, baccalaureate, or graduate degree. And also, a potential measure of success is transfer from an associate to a baccalaureate degree program. So either of those counts as success with regards to individual scholar outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay. In order to ascertain your viability as a project, please, we encourage you to use data analytics to examine patterns of student enrollment and outcomes. There should be strong campus partnerships across departments and colleges. You should be engaged with other aspects of your campus life, including student affairs, admissions, financial aid, anything and anyone that needs to be involved to maximally ensure the success of your scholars. Common requirements across the tracks. Um, Basically, you should justify by literature or by empirical evidence, if you have data of your own at your institutions, that these are the needs of the scholars and the likely approaches that are to be successful with your scholars. You must have student cohort development activities and faculty mentoring. These activities are crucial and critical, and it needs to be stated, however, you cannot mandate that students engage in these activities. However, you should do your best to incentivize such participation to the best of your ability. Also, you should have a clear and specific evaluation plan executed by an external evaluator, and that individual needs to be external to the project, not necessarily external to the institution. Next slide, please. Track one, as I stated earlier, had some modifications in 2025. There is now a maximum budget of $2 million for a period of up to 6 years, and 50% of that total budget request must be devoted to scholarships, and that is denoted on budget line F1. Additionally, the criteria for the PI is the same across tracks one and tracks two, so I'll just go through this here. The PI must be STEM faculty currently teaching in one of the S-STEM disciplines being supported, or a STEM administrator who has previously taught in one of those disciplines. If not serving as the PI, a STEM administrator should also be a member of the project leadership, and that is to ensure that the project has a voice at the administrative level. And then faculty being faculty from all of the departments and academic units that are engaging with scholars should have a role in the project either as co-PI, senior personnel, or scholar mentors. They don't all need to be co-PIs, but however, they should be explicitly mentioned in that capacity somewhere in your project description. Next. Okay. For track one, there's also some additional requirements. There needs to be an initial planning period. You should not be awarding scholarships in the first year of your project. This is an institutional capacity building activity, and so we expect in that first year, you will be ramping up all of the partnerships and dialogues on your campus in order to then be shovel ready in the second year when you are in fact going to then disperse scholarships. The planning period should be 6 to 12 months, and you're going to describe how you're going to go about getting yourself set up to be a scholar granting project in an additional supplementary document titled Track 1 Planning, and this ancillary should be no more than 4 pages. All right, and so in order to facilitate the ability to plan, this is why the threshold for scholarship requirement is only 50% rather than 60, as in the case of the other tracks. That extra 10% of wiggle room in terms of budget is to provide you with resources to do the planning. Track two, which is the mainstay track of the program, is also $2 million. However, 60% of the budget needs to be devoted to scholarships, and that is basically a tried and true metric across the history of the program. These are typically the single institutions of higher education, and the criteria for the PI are the same as I mentioned for track one, either member of faculty in one of the STEM disciplines being pursued, or a STEM administrator who's taught in one of those disciplines. Once again, there should be a STEM administrator either as co-PI or as other personnel on the project, and then there must be mentors across all of the departments being served by the scholarship project in some capacity, either as co-PI, senior personnel, or as explicit mentors. Next slide. There is a knowledge generation requirement in track one and track two. However, it is not strictly a research requirement. Formal research activities are not required. You can use non-scholarship funds to support activities for scholars, and this can also be used to leverage information that you want to glean about the success of scholars. Primarily, we expect you to generate knowledge via your project evaluation plan and by the dissemination plans that will be resulting from the evaluation results. Next slide. Track three, otherwise known as the Biggies, because they have a total maximum budget of $5 million. They also have an expectation that 60% of the total budget be devoted to scholarships. These are multi-institutional collaborations, as denoted by the title of the track. They should focus on a common interest or problem because in the case of track three, there is a research expectation. I'll dive into that in a moment. There should also be mutually beneficial collaboration and engagement across all the institutions. There should be no tokenism amongst any of the institutions. And in this case, the PI requirements are slightly different. One of the three requirements here listed must be true. It can be either a faculty member serving in one of the STEM disciplines being served by the project, a STEM administrator, or it could be a researcher in institutional, educational, or social science research who is leading the research effort for the Track 3 project. Next slide. Okay, here's where we're going to drill into the research a bit. Track 3 project should engage in high quality research to advance our understanding of how to adapt, implement, and scale up evidence-based programs and practices that are proven to foster positive outcomes for low-income STEM students. The research should be led by someone qualified to do such research. And so their credentials should be in social sciences or educational research or something aligned with the tenor of the research project. However, that individual doing the research cannot be the evaluator. They must be distinct entities. We don't have any preconceived notions about the theoretical frameworks or methodology used in that research because the questions are going to delineate and vary greatly amongst the projects. And so there is no sort of single source that you would want to look at. With all that being said, track threes really do need to lean into the research side of things because with the amount of investment in track three, we want to learn something. And we want to learn something that has the prospect of generalizability across the entire STEM community. And with that, next slide. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your engagement and your questions. And I'll pass the baton back to Tara. I think we're going to do some Q&A.
Yep, we're gonna do a lot of Q&A. And I see already that Mike Ferrara has been answering some of the questions directly in the Q&A. So please look through those answered tab as well as the open tab. But we'll start with this. I see Mike put an answer, but I think we could give voice to it as well. Someone asked, due to changes in the H-1B visa requirements, how likely is it that the STEM program will expire before a decision is made?
It is highly unlikely for this funding cycle that there will be an issue of that type. The program is currently funded. We get our allocations on a monthly basis, and there is a healthy pot of funds available, and we expect that to grow in order to support awards going out in this particular fiscal year.
Thank you. How should the 6 to 12-month planning period be
Tara?
calculated? Go ahead.
There.
Oh, you have something to add?
I was gonna ask if you could spotlight me also if I start answering
Oh,
questions.
sorry about that.
No, right, no problem.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. Our next question is, how should the 6 to 12-month planning period be calculated? If the decision is expected to be made in June, can the planning period be counted starting from June?
There's a lot of flexibility in that. Basically, from a backwards engineering perspective, you want to calculate when you expect to award that first tranche of scholarships and work backwards from that. And so you should design a start date that aligns with that particular window. And the reason that it's 6 to 12 months is because, yeah, sometimes awards go out in June, sometimes they go out in December. There's a flexibility that you want to accommodate there.
Yeah, your program officer will always work with you if the award date doesn't line up with what you thought it would be when you apply. So design your project timeline as the best faith effort you can. And if it turns out, like Tom said, you're awarded 3 months later than you might have hoped, your program officer will work with you to adjust the planning period, or, it's okay. Before we had planning periods, we had a lot of projects who said, okay, we're adding a planning year because things got funded a little bit late. We're going to use this time to make sure we're really ready to go. And the nice thing about S-STEM funds is that they do not expire. So we can often give you additional time at the back end to make sure everything you want to have happen can happen.
Okay, a related question to this planning period. Is there a preference for the planning period to be closer to 6 months or the full 12 months?
No preference. You want to design this based on what you believe your needs are to build the capacity necessary to execute a reasonably sound project.
Another question is about funding. Must students be funded during their first year, or can they be funded during their second or third year?
It's not required that they be funded in the first year. There are instances where that would be near impossible. For instance, some schools you can't declare a major in your first year, in which case having the eligibility criteria actually take hold is problematic. That being said, if you simply want to stretch out the dollars and capture them later, you would want to provide some justification for why it makes sense to capture them in their sophomore year rather than as incoming freshmen. There are arguments that can be made that are perfectly sound, but you do want to actually provide a justification for your approach. And so if you can do that, there shouldn't be a problem.
This question is related to track threes. Are track three projects allowed a startup period, or are they required to immediately begin recruiting students on day one?
So similar to Mike's comment, by virtue of when your project is actually awarded and started, there might be a window of opportunity wherein you're not going to award scholarships right away. However, the construction of your proposal is based on the notion that if awarded, you will be ready to stand up your project and get the scholarships rolling. So building or anticipating a planning span prior to your execution of the project is not advisable.
For track one proposals, is it allowable to continue to support scholars in a BS program when they transfer to the MS program at their institution?
Yes,
Yes.
oh,
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Mike.
Mike.
there's some nuance though to multi-level projects. If a scholar is accepted and maintains financial and academic eligibility as they move from an associate's to a bachelor's to a master's, through any of those stacks, they can remain scholars. They do not need to recompete every time they jump levels. However, if you are recruiting new scholars at any level, you must make sure that that competition is open to all eligible students. So students in the major that meet the financial eligibility criteria, they must have a fair and equal chance to participate. So a common mistake, for instance, that that proposals make. We see a lot of proposals, wonderful proposals that turn into projects, where there is a partnership between a 2-year and a 4-year institution. And the plan is that students from the 2-year institution will transfer to the 4-year institution. If that happens, they can continue being scholars at the 4-year institution. However, sometimes the 4-year institution ends up not as many students transfer as they thought were going to. So there are some spots for students at the 4-year institution. And so what the 4-year school will sometimes say is, okay, we're going to recruit transfer students to fill those spots that weren't originally scholars, but we're going to preference students from our original partner. No, if you are recruiting new students to be in that 4-year part of the project, it has to be equally and fairly open to everyone, because the school you're transferring from is not an indicator of talent. The things you are looking for when you are selecting students once they are financially eligible and in the degree programs that are receiving scholarships is their academic talent and potential. So you must open up that competition to all students at that point in their academic career. All students in the degree programs that are eligible for scholarships, I should say. You obviously do not need to add new majors or anything like that. We do not want you to do that. Okay, so a student who starts at one level and transitions to another does not need to recompete. But if you are recompeting or if you have open scholarship slots at one level, it must be a truly open competition that only assesses academic talent or potential, and then the other eligibility criteria, citizenship or residency, financial eligibility, meeting the definition of low income, things like that. That's a common error that proposals make.
So this is another question related to those levels again. So if you have an accelerated bachelor's to master's program, like a 5-year program, and the student is admitted to as a bachelor's student, is the funding able to carry over to their master's portion of the program?
As long as all of the eligibility criteria are still met, yes. And similar to what Mike said, you want to be attentive to any modifications that need to be accommodated in the transition. I will add one additional piece. If you have a multi-degree project in mind, bear in mind you are on the hook to provide us with data at both degree levels regarding the demographics of students that meet the eligibility criteria in the program. So, for instance, if you're going to do a BS MS, you need to provide data at the bachelor's level, you need to provide data at the master's level to demonstrate that this is, in fact, something that already has traction. If you're hoping to use S-STEM as a means to basically recruit and grow the BS-MS program because you have an undersubscription at the MS level currently, that's not going to fly because then you're telling us you want to give scholarships to students that don't currently exist. And we have too many projects with students that are real and in real time for us to basically experiment in that manner.
So we have a few questions I see related to budget. Um, what kind of incentives are allowed to get students to participate in capacity building? And there's some like related ones about can food be used for events with scholars? Can you speak to that?
So food, prizes, raffles, any kind of entertainment cannot be funded out of the grant in terms of recruitment. There's one exemption to the no food rule, which is basically a general NSF principle, and that is for the cohort building exercises or activities that you're going to engage in. But that's a post-recruitment consideration. If you're talking about getting your scholars to participate in activities, incentives cannot draw from funding. Now, you can do other sorts of creative things. Some projects, for instance, have created badging incentives, wherein basically you participate in these activities, and at the end of it, you get some sort of certification or badge. That's a no money proposition, but it does sort of make the idea of showing up a little bit more attractive. Um, Other than that, we're asking you to get creative. Also, we're asking you to tell us what you know to be the reasons that students might not show up, and for you to actually design customizable solutions to get over that hump.
Thank you. This one's related to graduate students. Unfortunately, Pell Grants are not available to graduate students. Our graduate students do not receive Pell Grants at our institution. How do we determine low income status in this case?
That's
Mike?
Mike?
yeah, that's a great question, a question we get a lot. Um, the most important thing is that you are, so there are some, so you want to look at the scholar's current income situation. So a common thing that we see is um, is the scholar at a certain multiple of the poverty line, right? At one or two, you need to justify if you're going to do a multiple. It could be just below the poverty line. It could be, twice the poverty line. You should tell us why, if you pick a particular multiple, that makes sense. As a reminder, graduate students can complete the FAFSA, even if they cannot ultimately receive Pell Grants. And sometimes just asking them to complete the FAFSA can give you some of the data you need to help determine, right? So that's a nice box. You don't have to recreate a financial reporting form. So I would encourage you to take a look at what the FAFSA collects and see what that data could help you determine about where the scholar is financially. Please do not use things like previous eligibility. If someone was eligible as an undergraduate for Pell, that does not mean that they are low income now. It may be more likely that they are, but we need a snapshot in time for the scholarship year to determine the financial situation of your students.
And I just want to do a shout out again. On February 9th, we'll be hosting another proposal prep webinar that has a panel of current S-STEM PIs who are leading graduate programs, so supporting scholars who are master's or doctoral students. Again, if you'd like to register for that, there's the website where you can find the registration link. So following back onto this, the idea about what money could be used for, like somebody else followed up with a question, could you fund food for a recruitment event from a different source, like the dean's office? And then okay, so that's a yes. And then if non-scholarship funds are provided for additional scholar support, such as travel to a conference or conference registration, does this count against a student's last dollar need or not? I assume an internship or summer research paid stipend would still count as part of the last dollar need calculation. Can you tell us about that?
So the last dollar calculation factors in only the cost of attendance value that your financial aid office uses to make determinations about unmet need. And so things like summer internships and the like are not part of the standard academic year tuition calculation or cost of attendance calculation. And in terms of your proposal, those would sit outside of the F1 line, which is where all of the scholarships go. So if I'm understanding the tone of the question, they are not last dollar entities. They are sort of post remission considerations for the scholar. A potential way of clarifying this is the stuff that goes on the cost of attendance, unmet need, F1 line is actually money that should never touch the hands of the student. This is negotiated between the bursar's office and financial aid. It is how things get remitted. You do not ever really hand a check to the student that they then pass on to the bursar. That money is exchanged internally within university systems. If you're funding an internship, that in fact could be a situation where a student lines up an internship or a research experience and you pay them directly. And so those two need to be disentangled in the budget. Anything that is directly funding an activity for a student should not be folded into the cost of attendance model.
Once scholars have been selected, can we fund their room and board for the time when they are doing, for example, a summer research project?
So once again, the distinction there is, are they on campus because their degree requirements lay that out as an expectation? Summer research falls out unless you have a compulsory summer research requirement in the curriculum. Summer research is an ancillary activity. It is not a degree activity, and therefore, and you can support those things, but they are not a cost of attendance issue, and so they would fall outside of that F1 line.
Yeah, if you are It gets a little bit dicey if it's a credit-bearing undergraduate research activity, right? Some degree programs allow students to get credit for undergraduate research, and it gets a little bit dicey if they are not a half-time student but are earning credit for the undergraduate research. If it is a credit-bearing undergraduate research opportunity, please follow up during the summer. Follow up with a question to Tom and I, because with the specifics of how your institution does things. Generally, though, as Tom says, no, that wouldn't count towards their scholarship limit, and it wouldn't be from the 60% for scholarships. But there are some. S-STEM is a wonderful program for us to learn about all the unique and, let's just say, weird ways your institutions do their business and account for things. So we're always happy to help you work through that if you think you might be in a corner case.
Does a scholar's financial status have to be verified each semester of participation?
Yes, maybe. Normally, it's verified annually, and once again, this is a function of when financial aid does its determination of Pell eligibility. That cycle tends to be annually. However, I don't know, maybe if an institution doesn't have enough work to do, they'll do it on a more frequent cycle. But the minimum expectation in practice is an annual reporting of eligibility.
I have a question about underrepresentation in STEM. In writing about the likely participation of students from groups previously underrepresented in STEM, is it worth mentioning historical MSI status, even if this is no longer being certified at the federal level? Any tips for including student demographic categories that are relevant to review?
So the focal point of S-STEM is academically talented, low income students, full stop. There is no other sort of unpacking or layering of demographic information beyond that. Now, having said that, we all understand that there are significant intersections between low income status and other demographic classifications. However, we don't require you to draw those distinctions. And in the current climate, I don't know what you might expect to gain by articulating that beyond simply providing context about your institution, insofar as if your low income students are disproportionately Hispanic, for example, understanding that you actually have structures in place to support Hispanic populations is something that you might want to speak to. But it can't be a driver and it shouldn't be associated with any of the goals of your project. Your goal should be to facilitate the success of low income students. How you go about that might be informed by the demographics of your low income population, but by no means should you insert any goals associated with those other statuses.
Yeah, I mean, Tom talked in the webinar slides about doing a needs assessment and using data analytics to support your project. Certainly telling us things you know about your students, like those demographic categories, it's a fact, right? So it's allowed. You're not going to be downranked for in any way. There's no downrank. That is who your students are demographically. But things that we see proposals do that are even more valuable, we know at many institutions, there's a correlation between, Tom used the example of Hispanic students, between Hispanic students and students that have a larger footprint of family obligations, right? And often HSIs have a higher proportion of students that aren't as far from home. They may live at home or they may be choosing a school to be close to home. We know that about that footprint of institutions. Well, you could design supports and other things knowing that a large number of your students are close to home and may have commitments at home, right? That may change the way you think about organizing your activities, timing your activities, scheduling your cohort building, any of these types of things that has nothing to do with whether or not a person is Hispanic, and actually probably will speak to a lot of your students that cut across all different types of demographic groups. So think about the characteristics and what you know about your students and your need assessment that is most likely to allow you to build a project that will speak to their authentic needs. Authenticity is the secret sauce. It is a drug for STEM panels, folks. If it seems like you're just sort of being generic, yeah, we're going to mentor them. There's going to be some clubs. It's going to be great. No problem. See you later. Panels are going to sniff that out. Tell us who the people are. Tell us what the stakes are. Tell us what you know about them. It is not too late to run a quick survey of your Pell eligible students or to ask some questions. Maybe it's too late to run a quick survey. Those things don't happen quickly. But, you know, you can gather information and tell us, our students told us this is their realities and this is what they need, and that's why we built the project this way. All right. That's what's important.
I'll actually give you guys a break for a second and answer this next one because it's related to a rec activity. Someone asks, what should be the budget for funds for the PI to participate in new PI professional development hosted by the STEM rec that should be included in year one of the budget? So actually, we're hosting our new PI boot camp next week at the AAAS building, and we're really excited to do so. To help you think about what estimates of cost might be. So think about flights from your location to Washington, D.C. for one participant and the cost to spend 1 to 2 nights in DC at a hotel based on, what time you'll be departing from. In general, the event will begin in the afternoon on the first day and then be a full day on the second day. So costs are going to differ slightly depending on where you're traveling from. But typically we assume about $500 for a flight, $250 per hotel room night. This is a really, really rough estimate. So take into consideration your location from DC, what the flights are about, and a rough number for hotel costs. Tom or Mike have anything to add to that?
This is just a personal bias. If you're looking at hotels, there are numerous hotels that are accessible by DC Metro, the subway system, and it is a really convenient metro ride to get to the AAAS building. And so you don't need to be physically co-located if you basically don't mind spending some time commuting to a locale. And there's a lot of opportunities around the DC metro area that could be considerably more affordable than a hotel room in the district.
And AAAS does our best to get a reduced rate with hotels that we often partner with when we run events. So we do our best to provide opportunities for a lower hotel rate. But yeah, just some food for thought when you're thinking of the new PI opportunity that's in the solicitation for is it track one? Correct me if I'm wrong. Track one proposal specifically, it's in the solicitation for, or is it track 1 and 2? Have I stumped Tom and Mike? We'll have to look at
I
the
think it's
solicitation.
just track one, although if you are a new PI that's applying to track two and you want to include that in your budget, go for it.
Thanks for that clarification. Switching to track 3 proposals. Should representatives of each institution be listed as a co-PI or senior personnel, or is one preferred over the other?
There's really no preference. In fact, there's an additional structural variation that you want to sort of make a decision about. You can submit a track 3 proposal as either a subaward structure, in which case there's only one PI and 4 co-PIs, and then there would be several senior personnel at the subaward institutions. Alternatively, you can submit as a collaborative proposal set, in which case there would be multiple PIs, one for each submitting proposer, and then multiple co-PIs under the aegis of the PI for each respective collaborative proposal. There's pluses and minuses to either approach. from a money perspective, the indirect costs are slightly impacted depending upon which you choose. We don't have any preference. We get all of the information bundled together regardless of how the proposal and project is packaged. It really is a function of how your institutions feel they are optimally playing with one another.
I will say that panelists, Tom mentioned this before, but it's worth reiterating because it's a common tripping point. Panelists and our team really attend to how authentic and durable the partnership is. If it looks like you've never met each other, we're going to ask some questions. If there's not a clear plan to communicate across sites, even if you're not moving students between sites, the team needs to come together. They need to share what they're learning. If projects are moving between sites, what's the launch pad from one and the landing spot from other, and how are those communicating? Right? That authenticity of collaboration can be a huge factor in any project that involves multiple institutions, and it often is.
Do track 3 proposals need to list an advisory council?
They don't need to. They can if they wish. However, the evaluation requirement still remains. And so this would be in addition to rather than in place of.
If you include an advisory board, please tell us what they're going to do, not just who they are. Otherwise, you're wasting space.
Yep.
How often are they going to meet? What kind of feedback? What do you think you're going to use them for? Why are they the right group of people? Things like that.
Another track 3 question. Along with using evidence-based practices, can track 3s also bring in innovative ideas?
Any track can do that.
Yeah.
They should be grounded. There should be a grounding of the evidence that indicate that the innovative idea would be a positive experience or contribute to student success, right? The goals of the program remain the goals of the program. But yeah, we see a lot of projects that say, okay, look, we've got A, B, C, and D, which are things that you might see in a lot of places. But here's some unique things that our project is doing based on our institutional characteristics or the focus or whatnot, that really make them shine.
The only thing I would add to that is make sure that you can make a case that the innovation is appropriate and aligned with the needs of low-income students. Because if you pull down the latest shiny thing from the literature, and it is not, in fact, something that would have high probability of success with low-income students, and say that the evidence base is basically for affluent students, don't assume that it is something that would necessarily translate to the low-income student context. So just a caveat there.
Going to the topic of mentoring. Typically, how many faculty mentors are proposed per S-STEM scholar? Is it usually a 1-to-1 ratio?
Could be. At a minimum, there needs to be one per department. And then any additional distribution beyond that is up to, who do you have at your disposal? Circling back to something that Mike said earlier, the authenticity piece is just as important here. If you're claiming that you will engage half of your department in mentoring for scholars, you might want to provide some clear demonstration that that is in fact not speculative, because a lot of us come from departments, and I don't know about your departments, but I have trouble envisioning half of my prior departments signing on to this additional work without the compensation to go with it. And so you are going to have to actually document that you have sign off or accession from the individuals that, and having named persons will help clarify and substantiate them that in fact the mentoring has legs.
And this actually speaks, what Tom's point leads into, sorry, Tara, I'm hijacking the list of questions because
No, it's good.
goes right into several questions that are there. So I'll read a question that ties in with Tom's point about commitment. The solicitation has changed in recent years to disallow letters of support, which were previously required for some partners. If we have industry partners with meaningful involvement, should we still, are we allowed to include the standard NSF letter of collaboration for each? And so Tom talked about what if half my department's going to mentor, they need commitment. These are all in the same vein. Not only can you include the standard NSF letter of collaboration, which is very boring, if I might say so. It effectively says, if this proposal is funded, it does what I'll say what it says I'll do. I would strongly advise you to collect those from any person who isn't a senior personnel that you claim is going to do something. Get them to sign the boring letter and point to it. So Tom's probably knows, I was about to make a triangle with my hands because I talk about the triangle of commitment a lot. People have seen this. There are three things that go into a proposal when people are committed to do stuff. There's the generic letter of commitment, which again just says, if this is funded, I'll do what it says I'll do, as detailed in the project description and the facilities, equipment, and other resources documents. That's one point. That points to the other 2 points. In your project description, you're going to say, I'll use Tom's example, we have 7 committed mentors from this department that are going to serve as scholar mentors. My advice to you, put a parenthetical that says, see letters of commitment and facilities document. And then the facilities, equipment, and other resources document is one of the most underused tools in proposal writing. People often just say, we've got a library and labs and offices. Go for it, right? Like, that's great. You should definitely tell us about those facilities, things that are important. The physical plant that is important for your project is great. Human beings are other resources. And I'm going to tell you a secret. Don't tell Tom I told you. There's no page limit to the facilities document. Now, that does not mean you should use it to substitute for pages and pages of proposal material. However, a younger Mike Farrar, when he wrote proposals, when he had letters, used to lay out, okay, here are the commitments from administrative units at the institution. And I would lay out, okay, Tom Kim, Director of Financial Aid, and I'd write a sentence that has committed to do the following. That should map onto what you said they were going to do. Committed faculty mentors. The following faculty have committed to serve as mentors for scholars as detailed in their letters and the project description. So now each point of the triangle, letter, project description, facilities document, they're all pointing at each other. That will maximize the chance that the reviewers will see all of the work you've done to put together the full team that you need to do this work. So go ahead. The nice thing about the new letter template is it's always the same. You don't have to ghostwrite voluminous letters tailored to 19 different people. Stick them on your letterhead, put the person's signature block there. Please don't sign for them. That's fraud. And ask them to sign the documents, but you can get those letters. I don't care if there's 50 of them at the back end in the supplementals, but make sure they point to the project description of the facilities document. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you, Mike. Can you provide stipends for faculty mentors, and can you pay for meals or other food for mentoring events?
So yes to paying mentors, no to food. Once again, the only context in which the program actually has an exception with the Office of Awards Management is in the case of cohort building activities, because those are required by the program.
Are bio sketches required for faculty who serve as mentors?
No, unless they were senior personnel.
I'm seeing some questions come in on the chat. Maybe
Go
it's,
ahead, Mike.
I know Julius has been saying, put them in the Q&A, please.
Oh, I thought you had seen one that you in particular that you
Oh,
wanted to
no, I
answer.
just keep seeing things pop across my chat and we're not answering them.
Ah, yes, because we're looking at the Q&A
Q&A.
and some are being answered directly in the Q&A. If you go to the answered tab, some are open, and you can also upvote questions that are already there that you also feel strongly about. And we're doing our best behind the scenes to kind of lump together questions that have similar themes, whether it's faculty mentoring, budget things like that. But it's kind of hard as questions pop up and things are moving around. Um, so can the student financial need criterion be different for entry into the program versus continuation in the program? For example, if the criterion for entry is Pell eligible, would it be okay for the continuation criterion to be near Pell eligible who has unmet need?
So that criterion is a definition, and your institution needs to plant a flag on that definition for low income. And so fundamentally, not really. However, your institution does have latitude with regards to how it defines low income. And so uh, a lot of people come in and say, Pell, clean break, no elaboration, that's it. And what they discover is the threshold for Pell sits on a bubble wherein students go in and out of Pell eligibility by virtue of circumstances that are completely outside of their control. So in some cases, an institution will have a somewhat more flexible definition. They'll say 125% SAI corresponding to Pell eligibility, because then that would actually allow them to eliminate the wiggle across the boundary. Your institution needs to establish that and needs to justify why that expansion beyond Pell is commensurate with a low income definition. It's usually not too hard to do that. And there are other measures of low income that are not directly associated with the Pell determination. There are other federal standards like the um, TRIO eligibility. There are other things like Health and Human Services, Poverty Index. Um, and so if you believe that Pell is going to get you into trouble downstream, don't open with it. Establish something that is a more logical benchmark from the get-go so that we don't have to go through this reconsideration after the fact.
If you offer scholarships in year one, so for freshmen, can you increase the cohort size in year three for juniors with justification of increase in the size of potential scholars pool and the project's ability to help new scholars become members of the cohort?
Um, so guessing that that expansion in year three is from transfers, because I'm having trouble envisioning, unless you're going around poaching other departments' majors and they'll show up in junior year, which I guess is also a thing. Um, that should be a rationale that you include with how you want to structure it. I mean, if that is in fact how your demographics play out, that you get a lot of late declarers in your major, and then your junior populations exceed by a significant fraction your freshman populations in the major, um, that is the situation in your department. So I could see a condition in which that could work. Um, Once again, and I say this a lot, and this actually addresses another one of the questions in terms of, if I had to tell you one thing, what would I tell you? These projects are about the students. And so if the student demographic data tells you you're going to get a small input at the freshman level, and then the aperture is going to open up, and in junior year, we're going to get a glut of new majors, then designing a scholarship that does, in fact, provide opportunities commensurate with the number of majors in your program kind of makes sense. It's different. It's not something that we usually see outside of transfer focused majors. But if that is in fact where the students are and when they show up, then designing a program that attends to the students makes perfect sense.
Similarly, can scholars join the program in their sophomore year?
Um, yes, once again, if you're starting everybody in sophomore year, there should be a rationale as to why and why that makes sense. Um, Alternatively, the other condition is sometimes you lose freshmen because they decide, oh, I thought I was going to be a physics major, but I took physics and it sucks. And then so you're going to have openings as a function of that happening, and therefore you can admit scholars into the program in subsequent years when those openings arise.
The
And
National
by the way,
Science Foundation loves physics.
so
Any negative opinions expressed about physics are not the official position of the National Science Foundation.
I,
I'm
I was
giving an
I
example.
was providing a personal anecdote in that regard. That was me.
Yeah. I can I add something to that? Tom's advice about if they're not entering at the beginning of their degree pathway, giving a justification for why is absolutely right. A piece of advice that we often give from a practical standpoint that may strengthen your proposal, it certainly won't weaken it, but will certainly make your life easier when if you are awarded. Plan for multiple entry points into your cohorts. Something that happens is not just that students leave, but we know students are so overwhelmed. Low income students are often working before they're coming into college. They end up getting deluged, especially if they've got good GPAs and good test scores. They're getting paperwork from everybody. Some of them are gonna miss the S-STEM opportunity. And you may find yourself, I walk into Tom's office and I say, "Hey, Tom, don't you have Tara in your Chem 1 class? Because she's in my Calc 1 and she's crushing it. She was in office hours and she happened to mention she's working 2 jobs. I think she might be STEM eligible, right? These things happen. You find talented, sometimes students who on paper it's not clear, all of a sudden you realize they're rock stars once they get into the classes, whatever. If you have spots, have ways to find those students. Right. If you say you're going to recruit them all as high schoolers before they start freshman year and you do that, awesome. That's great. But have a plan about ways you might identify that talent and find good scholars at a couple other points. It's not every minute of their academic journey, but having a few entry points planned into your proposal is a good strategy.
This question's from somebody who recently launched a BS degree program, and they would like to support alongside their more established BS degrees. But there's no enrollment data for the new degree program since it's just launching this fall. Could they make projections on enrollment for this new program? If not, do you have recommendations on how you would do a pool analysis for the new program?
So I mentioned with regard to an earlier question, we're really not keen on the prospect of funding an institution to provide scholarships to hypothetical students, which is why that demographic data is crucial to standing up the credibility of your proposition. So I would say it is not in your best interest to look at your new program and say, ooh, if we could get scholars into the new program, that would help flesh up the enrollment for the program. We're not here to support your program. We're here to support the students. And so until you can demonstrate that you have students in that program that meet all of the other expectations for the S-STEM program, it is not to your benefit to try and incorporate them in the project. If you were to limit it and not include that program and get awarded, if in fact it turns out that there's an opportunity to support students that appear after the fact, you can talk to your program officer and see about, maybe modifying your award to include a new program once you've established that there are in fact eligible students in that program. But out of the gate, I would discourage you from looking at this as an opportunity to populate a new program.
Another program question. If you're applying for funding for a bachelor's to master's degree program, do you need to have the opportunity open to all undergraduates and all graduates in both of those programs so that it's equal opportunity?
So if you are recruiting students who would be earning the bachelor's in the bachelor's to master's program, then your recruiting and your selection process must not privilege students in that program. So yes, if you have a bachelor's to master's program and you're going to be recruiting scholars that are going to start in the bachelor's part of that, if that is your intention, all students at the same point in the bachelor's degree need to get a fair and equal shake. You cannot you cannot give them points. You shouldn't even have the selection committee consider whether they're in the bachelor's to master's program. You should not ask them questions about whether they intend to enroll in the bachelor's to master's program. It should be about the talent of the person in front of you if they are pursuing that S-STEM eligible degree. Now, as I said before, if you accept a student as a bachelor student and they happen to be in this bachelor's to master's program, they do not need to recompete to keep their scholarship for the master's part. But intention to enroll in or enrollment in that program cannot be a consideration for selection. And that actually goes to something broader. It's an issue that people make. We see an error, excuse me, that people make. We see beautiful proposals all the time that focus on a sub-discipline, right? So you're writing a proposal for civil engineers, but the thing that you really want is students in water resources management. And you build this beautiful program around water resources management. But it's the name on the degree that you're scholarshiping is civil engineering, bachelor's of science in civil engineering, let's say. You cannot ask students if they prefer to do water resources management, if they intend to do water resources management. You shouldn't be asking about their career plans because that's not an indicator of their talent. You have to select students in the civil engineering program that are the most talented, otherwise eligible students that you can find. So just be aware of that because we decline proposals all the time that say, I'm going to give preference. I only care about students who have this flavor of the degree.
Can scholarships for students span 5 years or include students that have a year 5 due to an internship or some other opportunity?
Absolutely.
Um,
Can I add to that
Go ahead.
question? Because we encourage you. A lot of projects come in and intend to fund students for 4 years instead of 5. And many of their scholars get through with their 4 years of funding. However, reviewers sometimes ask, well, what about the students who aren't quite done after 4 years? Can they get the 5th year? Solicitation says if they remain academically eligible, you have to give them the 5th year. And sometimes PIs come back to us and say, yeah, but I only planned for 4. It's messing up my budget. Work with financial aid or the registrar to get the data. If 25% of the low-income students take 5 years to graduate, typically, as opposed to 4 at your institution, tell us that and craft your budget so that 25% of your scholarships you're planning to be 5-year scholarships. That's part of that authenticity. You've really done your homework about how long it typically takes someone that could be a scholar to get through your program. When the rubber hits the road, if you're funded, your program officer will always work with you. You recruit the students you get, and you support them the way you need to support them. If it turns out, oh, actually, no, they did all graduate in 4 years, we'll work with you to spend the quote unquote extra money. If you end up having too many students that need a 5th year, we have some mechanisms to help support you to make sure those students get through. All right. But use what you know about your students and actually plan for them.
Are S-STEM planning grants available and grants for time to do a needs assessment?
Yes. However, they're not a part of the solicitation, so they're not associated with the March 3rd deadline. Planning grants are articulated in the main proposals and procedures guide at NSF, NSF 24-1, the proposals and awards policies and procedures guide. In there is some explanation of how you would go about submitting a planning grant proposal. The short of it is email Mike or myself and ask about doing a planning grant, and we will basically give you the thumbs up or not regarding your planning grant idea, and then walk you through the rest of it.
Ideally, email both of us so we can round robin out. We usually sort of alternate who picks these up as they come in.
Academically talented, what does that mean from your perspective?
Yes. That's for you to tell us.
Mhm.
Talent and potential is elusive. I'll tell you what it isn't. Only a GPA number or only a test score. Give the students the opportunity to tell you the story about what opportunities they had and how they took advantage of them, why they're studying what they're studying. Letters of recommendation can be great, but can also be time consuming for scholars who have other commitments to track down. So you can use them, but think about the totality of what you're asking scholars who often have a lot on their plates to do. Hear their voices. We want to hear their voices through your proposal. Try to hear their voices through your application process. Learn about who they are. Their talent will manifest itself. It is definitely not just a number on a page. I understand that's more work for you as you try to sort through who you want to give scholarships to, but I also promise you it's worth it for you and for them.
Should we budget for recruiting in multiple years other than the first year? And can you give some examples of recruitment activities which are allowable for funding?
So these questions typically arise, and correct me if I'm misreading this, in the situation where you are thinking about outreach to prospective students and who haven't necessarily matriculated to your institution. That in and of itself is the job of your admissions department. And so it's not really the bailiwick of S-STEM to go and get students to enroll in your college. Typically, projects in S-STEM will engage with admissions and financial aid once the student commitments are filed, usually in May. And from that population of accepted and committed students, you go in and basically announce to eligible students, hey, you are eligible for this scholarship. Insofar as there's a recruitment involved there, yes, but activities kind of denotes that you're doing outreach, and that's not in alignment with where successful projects typically go.
There is an exception.
Go.
Some of our graduate projects
Mhm.
ask for small amounts of money to have a table at a disciplinary conference because often graduate program recruiting is more likely to fall within the department into the program. Sometimes the graduate school does broader recruiting, sometimes they don't. So we generally undergraduate recruiting, though, Tom is 100% spot on. Graduate recruiting, if you said, look, we always go to the joint mathematics meetings. I'm a mathematician. We go to the joint mathematics meetings and we go to the graduate fair to recruit graduate students. And we think we'd be able to get S-STEM students there. So we're going to pay for half the table and make sure there's an S-STEM rep there. We're going to send people to the meeting to represent S-STEM. it all has to be reasonable in terms of the total price tag or whatever. We do see it sometimes with graduate recruiting, but often it's in tandem with what the program's already doing. So it's not like you're paying for the whole table or the whole thing. It may just be defraying the cost or sending a person or something. But even that's not super common.
Can you provide guidance in the current regulations on how to use language for this grant focused on low-income students with the avoid language for proposals such as don't say inclusive or increase, things like that?
So in the current climate, you can say things like inclusive and increase with respect to low income students. Low income students are not a protected category that would then bring up issues of DEIA. And so, by all means, tell us what you're going to do for and with low income students. Um, Circling, bringing back the earlier conversations. However, do not conflate that aspiration with other sorts of demographic categories. And so if you tell us that you're going to expand the participation of low-income students in AI, because AI is a hot thing right now, okay, that is fine. However, do not also say we expect to increase the participation of women in AI, because that would actually flag your proposal as being out of compliance with the current constraints.
What constitutes an STEM eligible discipline? Is there a list of these disciplines?
So S-STEM supports any discipline that is currently funded at NSF. So the obvious ones are there's a division of chemistry, there's a division of biological sciences, there's a division of mathematical sciences. Those things that are titular within the structure of NSF are obvious. If you have an edge case, you can email me or Mike or both of us and ask us to review the criteria with regard to your disciplinary eligibility, and we'll get back to you with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That being said, I get a lot of questions about psychology, sociology, anthropology. There is a directorate of social and behavioral economic sciences. They are a part of NSF. Psychology is S-STEM eligible, period.
Going back to the previous question about forbidden words. First of all, NSF does not have a list of forbidden words. As Tom said, the context is what matters. But I just dropped a link in the chat to the FAQs on the NSF's updated priorities. That is generally a guidance that we hope will help. That is very much aligned with the way we are doing our business, the way we are doing reviews of proposals, all of those things now. So I just put that link in there. That's on nsf.gov. There are some things there that are sort of very specific about post-award management, but there are a lot of questions about, can I do recruiting for certain groups of people? And the answer is actually yes, as long as it's part of a broad recruiting plan. You can have targeted recruiting aspects as long as your overall recruiting plan is looking to recruit across demographic groups, things like that. There's some useful stuff there, and it really is what we are adhering to internally, almost to the letter. I cite those FAQs to people all the time, and we go to them when we're trying to make sure that we're in line with the new priorities as we make decisions.
We're wrapping up on time, so I just want to ask each one of you, is there a key piece of advice or something that you want to share with potential proposers that maybe it's something we haven't talked about yet, or maybe it's something you want that we talked about that you wanted to reiterate? What key advice do you have?
So I'm going to double down on something that I said earlier. Okay. S-STEM is about the students. And in some cases, proposers should consider what is the lens through which they are viewing this opportunity. If at any point you think to yourself, ooh, if I got 15 scholars, I could resurrect the chemistry department because our enrollments have been down the last few years. Or, ooh, we have a new program that I think that we'd like to stand up and, ooh, wouldn't this be an awesome opportunity to get students to engage in that major because, hey, scholarships. Those sorts of ladder mindsets are really easy to sniff out. And they're also super hard to substantiate and evidence with regards to how you're going to stand up a viable S-STEM project. Okay, and so in all things, first and foremost, your consideration should be how is this advantaging the scholars that we have in our classrooms? The other thing is don't hypothesize about students that don't currently exist because we're not interested in you trying to go out and do something that you've been pretty much unsuccessful at doing thus far without scholarships being a part of the proposition. Okay, so make it about the students. How are the students going to benefit? What is the prospect for the students? If you hold to that central ethos, you're more likely than not going to attract positive vibes from the reviewers.
Anything to add, Mike?
No, I would have said almost exactly the same thing. Like I said, we want to hear the scholars' voices. Ask them what they need and weave that in. You're going to know some things that they need that they don't realize they need. That's the vantage point of your expertise. But they're going to tell you a lot of things you wouldn't have thought of that are going to make a difference for them. My only other piece of advice is don't send Tom any physics proposal. No, I'm just kidding. We love physics. It was just totally a joke, just a call back to a joke from before. I do want to say, I want to call out our ASL interpreters really quickly because I'm from New Jersey and have a tendency to talk as fast as humanly possible. And I've been trying to slow myself down, and they have both been champs. I see that they're covering it all. So I just want to call them out. They're awesome. And I
Absolutely.
apologize
Kudos.
for any fast talking that I've been doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you both, Tom and Mike, for sharing your insights. Thank you to our interpreters. And thank you all for participating and asking your very insightful questions. I imagine, Tom and Mike, people can email you directly with questions as always, but we will be holding another webinar next week in a similar format. And keep in mind, we're holding in February one focused on community college contexts and one focused on graduate program contexts. So please, if any of those apply to you, we encourage you to join us. We want to provide your feedback on today's session because we're always taking your input to improve our offerings for the S-STEM community, which includes potential S-STEM awardees. Please take a moment. We really read these and use this information. If you can't do it now, we'll send you an email with a follow-up to this link. And next slide, please. It was really great to connect with everybody. We encourage you to keep in touch with the AAAS S-STEM Rec. Visit the Rec website, explore our resources. There's so many on our website. Sign up to receive our monthly newsletter and follow us on social media. Thanks again to everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to engaging with you in future webinars and activity. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and best of luck with your NSF S-STEM proposal submissions. Thank you all.
Thanks for